Greetings, gamers, and welcome to the 64th live stream from the MisfitGamersStudios. I am your host, Vortex, and this is D&D Discussions. On today's episode, we actually have a really fun topic. We are going to be talking about the sense of urgency, or at least from DM's point of view, creating the sense of urgency. We have a couple different ways that we're going to talk about this. We have two main categories. We're going to break it down into the core aspects, the very fundamental things that we think that you'll need or that you should be able to use in order to create a really good sense of urgency within your game, whether it's in a campaign or in an encounter. And then we're going to talk about a second category, which is all the other ways that you can enhance that sense of urgency as the game progresses. As you'll notice, I do have a little bit of a weird camera right now. We are going to be trying a new camera with Kage in the studio today. So hopefully it won't be a little too jarring, but let me know what you guys think about it. We definitely want to play around with this a little bit more. But let me switch over because we do have Kage with me today. What up, my dude? How's it going?
Well, shalom, my friends. Greetings, friends and neighbors. I'm very excited to be here. This is gonna be very cool. Very excited for this topic today. We were talking a little bit about it before stream.
Yeah, little pre-stream prep.
You know, get a little hype for it. I'm here for that. It's a good deal. It's a good deal.
Yeah, hopefully you guys are. I don't know. Wait, let me know what you guys think about the new camera. I just realized just now I didn't get rid of the top bar here. I didn't size it. The camera's all the way to the top, so we still have that. I was trying to get rid of that, chat. Like the whole point was to try to get rid of all of that, and we were boxed in and everything.
Whatever, you can't even tell. It's fine.
Yeah, but over time that's going to probably disappear as well. The idea is to just make better YouTube content once we start making these better episodes. I think this will be a much better layout. I think it looks nicer. It's a lot more focused on us, and we could still go back to maybe like a top bottom or something if we do end up getting a third person in, because I do like the fact that does cover the whole couch.
Right.
But for the most part, we don't need to see the blank couch all the time, right? Like I think we've gotten to the point to where it's like we're not going to be having as many special guests as we once thought we might.
I mean, and it could happen at some point.
Yeah,
but
I love the idea. I'm liking where we're going with this, and I don't want to complicate things. I mean, it took me a while to decide to just change the cameras, so I think we'll just little by little sprinkle things in.
We figuring it out. That's why like a little experimentation here and there.
Just a little experimentation is fine. But yeah, everyone. So we have a really good topic. I think we have a lot to cover. We're definitely going to have a lot of opportunities to branch off and kind of do our thing, rant off in different little areas.
A little bit.
But I do just want to preface this episode today. I know it's normally, Fridays are normally our day to just kind of rant as long as we want. But my wife did just get back into town after a couple of days out, so we do want to go out to dinner tonight. So the goal is to not have this run to midnight. So bear with us. We're not going to try to rush anything. We're not going to force this to end soon, but we are going to try to control our side tangents and try to stay on topic so we can get through it, because I do have quite a few notes here that I want to get through.
Very cool ones.
So we'll just jump right into it today. So sense of emergency. It is something that I've realized over time that D&D doesn't have a good base mechanic for. Outside of a good narrative, outside of a good DM basically saying, hey, you have 3 days in game to do this, or, at this encounter, if you don't defeat this person within 5 rounds, something bad's going to happen or they're going to escape. But that's it. Like, it really comes down to just a solid narrative, but D&D doesn't have any mechanic for it. And that's something that I've always struggled with, is how do you make a good sense of urgency? Like, it's one thing to make a good narrative out of it, but how do you get the players involved? How do you get the players to actually, how do you get the players to get more bought in with it? And that's kind of what I want to talk about, is like some of the things that I've learned over the years, some things that I've seen from other DMs that I've played with that got me really invested. That's the word I was looking for, invested. And things that I've tried over the years that have seemed to appeal to my players, things that I've used on, you and Vixie, that seem to appeal to you guys. And so I try to, take note of what I've done over the years. So we're going to start first off with the core foundation, right? The core ideas. I think there's like seven of these basically that I feel any combination of these will set this stage for a really good sense of urgency. And again, this is a sense of urgency both in the sense of a campaign where it is, I think the example we were using is it could be an environmental campaign urgency, like, hey, a deity or a cult is trying to aggravate and make a volcano erupt, right? And you have so long to stop that. Or it could be the BBEG is going to let off a kill everything spell. I think you were talking about a good idea of taking a riff off of Full Metal Alchemist, and doing the soul casting spell
where they assimilate the souls into the Philosopher's Stone.
Right. So to create that, and I think that's been used multiple times where people will be like trapped in a building or a town, and the whole town's basically being sacrificed for a huge spell, right? So those are larger campaign settings, and then there's the types of ways that you can do it in an encounter, right? Where you can have a really powerful mage casting a spell that will now, and we talked about this is actually doesn't really exist. I don't even think there's ninth spells that do this, but you can have a mage that's going to cast like a spell that takes like 3 to 5 rounds to cast, and at the end of that 3 to 5 rounds, it's basically going to be like kill everything in a 100-mile radius, something like that. And that could be really cool, right? And then you could have other defenses, right? Like there's additional mages there casting an anti-magic spell, and then another one's casting like shield, right? So you have 2 of these casting these like barriers, and then in front of that you have minions. So you have this sense of urgency that I have all of these obstacles, but it's not a normal encounter. I do have to get to the end of it, otherwise this catastrophic thing is going to happen.
It's much less of, hey, I just need to hack and slash until nothing's moving, and it's way more of, hey, there's a goal that I need to achieve in this encounter that's more than just kill everything. Like, if I don't get over there, if I don't get through these, I don't care if all the minions are dead yet, I really need to get through that barrier. So if we have somebody chunking away at that barrier over there while I'm working my way through these minions, hopefully by the time I get there, it might be broken so that I can get through. And then maybe some of the other DPS dudes can just handle the crowd control behind me.
So I hate to say it, but now that I'm thinking about this too, looking at my notes, Baldur's Gate did a really good job at this.
Yeah.
Like right out the gate, the very first, like one of the first boss fight, you could say, like in the very beginning, you're still on the Illithid ship, right? You first create your character. It's very beginning of the game. You're on the ship and you get to the control room, and you have to technically get to the controls before the ship crashes, and you can actually fail it. Like you can actually like fail
die before the game even starts.
Exactly. And it's like, they do that a few times where they do have a sense of urgency, but again, still very narrative based. But they do like, now that I like looking at the notes, they do quite a few of these, but it's also so structured in the fact that it's one single event that's unique, that is not unique to anyone. It is the event that everyone goes through. And while they hit a lot of these markers and check a lot of these boxes, they also don't really like it, it's only reproducible so much, right? Like it doesn't really feel like again, these are very scripted moments. So that's the only downside, is they're scripted, but they do a very good job, especially the first time you play through them, doing exactly this. So I do have to give credit where credit's due.
I'll say there are moments, I think you and I even talked about it last time we were in here, about how sometimes giving control to the DM, which from my perspective is kind of like a scripted moment, give them a control, even though there's something happening, even though it might be combat oriented. Hey, here's what unfolds in this moment as you're trying to break through this barrier,
exactly.
X, Y, and Z, whatever the case may be, and I think that those moments can happen. But again, I think in a real D&D game, those moments, while they might be scripted by you, they're also, that script is created in that moment for this need. It wasn't necessarily something
it's dynamic.
Yes, very much so. It's a dynamic narration or scripting of a certain moment to bring everybody to a collective outcome. And so I totally see that.
So yeah, so starting with the first core mechanic, obviously in terms of setting the, or getting a sense of urgency, the first thing you want to do is set the stage, like set the setting, get setting the scene, whatever you want to call it. But you really want to just set the stage and basically paint the picture of what the emergency is. It's the volcano, it's the death spell, it's the BBEG is going to get away. Whatever it is, whether it's the whole campaign, whether it's an encounter, whether it's just a portion of the campaign, however you want to set the emergency, you have to make the setting right within the narrative. You have to make it make sense. And really what you are doing in this stage is setting the how and the why. How is this a sense of emergency? And why is it a sense of emergency and how is it happening, right? The sense of emergency is the, everyone's going to die because it explodes, or the BBEG that you've been chasing for 10 years is going to get away and you'll never find him again, or the mage is going to literally kill you and everybody around you. So you have all of these scenarios that you could be in, and a well-placed narrative will really set that tone, but it's really how else you can express it, right? You have to express what the threat is, why it's a threat to you, and what the expectations of that threat are going to be.
Right.
So of course, first core setting, or first core foundation, you have to set the scene. But beyond that, these next ones I think are really going to make it stand out, right? Because that's, I think, a lot of the times where I've seen it not work as much is where people stop there. You just set the scene. And especially when there's no follow through, right? Like I call it the I think I use Skyrim as an example because they're really bad at this, right? Where it's like the video game concept of you only have so much time before this thing happens, and you can literally sit there for an eternity and it will never happen. Mm-hmm. Like the concept of there's no follow through with the threat. So you can set the setting all you want, but players are going to get distracted. And the game's going to continue the way it goes. So unless you are unless the plot and the big threat are literally, intersecting, you need more to set a sense of emergency, because setting a sense of emergency isn't just setting a threat and having it loom. It's also engaging the players to fear that threat. You can't just say it's going to happen. You have to actually make the players feel that threat, right? So part of that setting the scene is also planning ahead, and part of setting the scene is planning ahead, understanding what is the time restriction, because that, of course, every aspect of an emergency has a time frame, right? Is this a campaign time frame where you have a year in game? Is this an encounter where you have so many rounds? Or is it some sort of, if certain benchmarks are hit, you guys fail. So I'm going to roll a dice every so often to see if the enemy succeeds in their next task. And if they succeed so many times before you get to them, they're going to get away.
This is an interesting, you've brought up an interesting question in my mind. And I don't know if so a lot of the times we're talking about setting up emergency. When are we saying that we want to go about doing this? Or are we just saying whenever we do want to go about doing this,
I'm discussing not so much when it's appropriate to set a sense of emergency. I'm talking about when you want to. This is how it goes. Yeah, I want to do this is, in my opinion, how to establish that sense of emergency, right? Because again, whether it's the campaign as a whole, whether it's a portion of the campaign, or whether it's even just one encounter. The idea is, once you've set the campaign, right, you've discussed, hey, that volcano, it's going to erupt in X amount of time. Hey, if the BBEG does X, Y, and Z, he's going to escape, and you have to get to him before he does that. Or, hey, in this combat, you notice this mage is going to do something that's going to kill everyone in this room. So you have to stop him regardless of the rest of the encounter, right? Because that breaks kind of the traditional mindset that most people have approaching an encounter, which is just kill everything, right? Until everything stops moving. But if you set a different parameter, that parameter could change the whole battle, but it also at the same time tells you the battle isn't always just about murder everything, it's about an actual objective.
Right.
So you set the scene, you have a time restriction. You have to have some sort of, and I say time, doesn't have to be a number of days, number of rounds, but something has to be an endpoint.
That does bring up a good point, because you're talking about, hey, if we are going to see a progression to this endpoint, right, we are going to want to have reasonable indicators in between those times. You don't want it to just be like, hey, I set the scene for you, and the next time you even think about this
is when it's
blowing up in your face.
And
right?
that's the thing. So having that time restriction ahead of time, when you're setting the scene, you don't have to tell them downright to like the second, but you do want to set the time of here's how long, or roughly here's what you have to do. Because if you just say, hey, that's going to happen, again, Skyrim logic. Okay, it's going to happen. I'll get to it when I get to it. Mm-hmm. But if it's that whole thing of this is when you have to get to it by, that also interrupts anything else the player's agenda had on it, right? Because other players will usually have an agenda. They'll have a storyline that they're following. And if this all of a sudden, again, if this isn't the campaign that they're running, this interjects itself, right? So having that time frame interjects itself as an emergency, something that you want to go off of. And then on top of that, right, you have to have something beyond that, right? You have now you've set what's happening. You've set the time frame. Now that third key piece, you have to set the loss consequence. What happens if you don't succeed? It's D&D, right? We always talk about, like, we always assume we're going to continue. But first thing you want to do is, hey, here's what's happening. Here's how long you have until it happens. And here's the fallout.
So that brings up a good point. When you're talking about setting these loss consequences, I would think that would be a large part of setting the scene in the first place.
That's what I'm talking about. These three things are setting the scene. You set the scene because you're saying, hey, that volcano, they're trying to make that volcano erupt, right? Okay, they're going to do it in 10 days. And after that, if it erupts, now you set the scene, you give them the time frame. So what? What's the big deal if I don't stop it? If it erupts,
X, Y, and Z
it destroys the temple of your god, weakening them, and the enemy god that charged his followers to do this will gain a big following, or it will destroy an artifact that you need to kill the BBEG. If this isn't the campaign, right? You set that loss consequence. Doesn't have to be your character's going to die. It doesn't always have to be that way. Like you said, the Alchemist one, or the Full Metal Alchemist one, it could just be that what that happens, it doesn't always have to be death, but it could be that what happens is going to severely hinder whatever else you're working on. Or it is the thing you're supposed to stop and the game will, you know what I mean? Like there's so many ways to set a loss consequence that isn't just, well, your character dies. Because guess what? Players face that every session. The whole concept of their character dying is kind of lost on characters or players, right? The whole concept of losing to characters is kind of lost on them. But having a loss consequence that's bigger than that they imagine this too, a loss consequence they have to live with is worse than one about losing your character, because you move on to the next character and you don't feel remorse for those actions. But if you make them live with that, right? Imagine the thing that they don't stop is going to empower the BBEG and make him have twice as much life, right? Like imagine you have these things scattered throughout your campaign where if you fail at certain ones, you're just helping the BBEG, making the final boss harder, right?
Right.
So yes, all of these are setting the scene, but I feel like they're worth noting
because definitely.
It's one thing to say, hey, that volcano is going to explode or that mage is going to do a death spell. But then saying, here's how long it's going to take.
But exactly, I think that's why these are what I would call like subpoints of setting the scene. Like that's what setting the scene looks like. If you do not have realistic consequences, if you do not have an articulatable time frame, you know, like all these things are going to be, because like you can set plenty of scenes without those things.
Exactly.
But those scenes that you set are not going to have this sense of emergency.
And it's more important to stick with those, right? It's more important to say, hey, you know, it's going to explode in a week. No, you have 7 days and I am counting. Every time you guys do actions, I'm counting. You can only do this much in a day. Like that's the difference between, in my opinion, the difference between setting the scene and giving a time frame is because you can say that, but setting that time frame needs to be.
When we're given those like intermittent like points where we're actually marking the time, where you're reminding, where you're constantly bringing them back to that moment that the emergency is here and it's present. It's like I had the idea. You talk about 7 days to the eruption of a volcano. Imagine every single, there are going to be 7 earthquakes that you will experience.
Don't get ahead.
Like,
don't get ahead of the
because
conversation. But don't get ahead of the conversation. That's not what we're talking about yet. That's not at the core foundation. That's not in the cores yet. That's later in the conversation.
Right.
Like you're getting there, but we don't want to get too far ahead because that's
Right.
going to rabbit hole us in the wrong time frame.
For sure.
But yeah, so having those things set and sticking to them. Again, you have to stick to these things, right? You don't want to be the wishy-washy DM of, well, you guys didn't succeed, but it really wasn't that bad. You know what I mean? Like, the volcano erupted, but it didn't destroy the town. Like, then what was the point, right? Like, if you know because then you can't set them up for an emergency in the future, right? They're not going to believe it. You
It's never going to, yeah.
You have to make them. So one of my things that I like about the lost consequence is you have to make it meaningful and permanent. Because the concept of a temporary, like if you make something happen and then you undo it later, again, you're undoing future emergencies. You have to make something meaningful, impactful, and you have to make it stick. That's why I like the idea of making the characters live with it.
What about turning that failure into another mission in and of itself to go and undo it? That's that kind of a deal. I
could see situations where it would work, but as a premise, I don't like it because again, undoing a failure stops failures from feeling bad. Like what I'm talking about when I see, because again, there's a lot of times where
sometimes the consequence is just adding more work.
But that's not. But again, to me that's not enough because that's already in the game, right? Like that kind of stuff is already throughout there because again, combat, right? Combat's always kind of going to have that aspect of I could always die, right? But the sense of emergency is how to get the player more invested in this particular aspect, right? It's not just something that they're going to
What I'm bringing up
through.
is like you said, there are plenty of other consequences other than just death that you can throw at these players. And one of the ones that I'm suggesting is so imagine you're trying to work towards this end and you're so close to your goal. You've been building up to this for a really long time. And if you fuck this up, it's going to add another 4 or 5 other legs to your journey. Like that as a consequence. And maybe
to me though, but to me as a player, I'd stop playing that game. Like to me, that literally sounds like how being employed works.
And the reason why I bring that up is because there are a lot of players who I feel like would say the same thing about certain permanent consequences.
And that's
it's
fine.
exactly what I'm talking about is like there are any consequence you can bring to the table. Somebody could be like, yeah, it's no longer, that's not fun for me anymore.
But yeah, but but the thing is to me, if you can undo it, it's not an emergency. Like that's where I would make the difference of if you fail at this,
that's
that
if
thing
your
I'm trying to
priority isn't getting something done as fast as possible. Like if it's like, hey, if I'm motivated enough because I want this thing and I want to be able to use it now, I want to be able to do something, whatever the case may be, that can be for a certain individual their emergency. Like their and I kind of like when I was in the military, it was a sense of urgency. Not necessarily everything was an emergency, because one of the biggest things that I did was stores, right? That's technically not an emergency, but we ran stores with a sense of urgency.
Right.
Like we're moving, like we're out here to actually take action and do something.
I fully agree with you.
Sit around.
I fully agree with you that there is a difference between sense of emergency and sense of urgency, but that's why I feel like the difference is in that permanent consequence. A sense of urgency is something that you have if you don't want work to be harder later. That is a sense of urgency. A sense of emergency is if we don't, irreparable damage.
Yeah.
That's and you're absolutely right. If we were talking about sense of urgency, I would 100% agree that adding more work is exactly the expectation, because you're trying to sense of urgency. You're trying to get something done in a faster, more efficient way. I just don't think when I think of emergency, when I think of I'm trying to set the stage, I want my players invested. This isn't just a normal encounter. This isn't a normal quest.
Purpose in emergency versus urgency is not the same goal. You are not trying to accomplish just, as you said earlier, investment by your players. There's more than just investment that you want. You specifically want...
I want investment, and like, again, the sense of urgency is, hey, try to get this done efficiently. But the sense of urgency still is like, okay, but if we don't get it, it's like, it's not the end of the world. But that sense of emergency, those moments where it's like, again, it's almost like that interruption. Like, this now becomes your newest sudden top priority. Not just a sense of urgency of, hey, this would be better done. Because again, like the military, whenever I think of sense of urgency, it's that mindset of this is best done now in order to prevent something bad. But a sense of urgency is, if we don't, something terrible happens. Like that, you know what I mean? Like, that's where, and again, it's more pedantic, but I think, because that's how I run High Point with very specific words. If I were to separate them out, you're absolutely right. But I think that's where I'm making the distinction, is when I think of emergency versus urgency, it is the outcome. It's the consequence. If the consequence isn't dire, it's not emergency.
So would you say that the difference between the two is less about the motivation of the players and more strictly about the outcome of the outcome of the consequence?
For the most part, yes, because this is where what I'm trying to, like, this whole topic is, how do you get the investment from the players? Because saying that there's going to be an eruption and thousands die doesn't matter to the players. But if you make it matter, right? If these are followers, or if these are family, if you tie in these aspects, you'll get that buy-in, and it won't just be okay, we don't want to die. Because that gets kind of cliche, because every encounter is a we don't want to die.
For sure.
But you want a sense of more than urgency, because that emergency is you want them to be like, I don't want to do anything else. I don't want to delay. This needs to happen. And the difference of, hey, you know that BBEG, like the guy that you swore you would kill? A sense of urgency. So here's an example, right? Here, you're going after this BBEG. You've been going after him for, let's say, 10 years in game. Your whole goal, your whole character's arc is to get him. Sense of urgency is get to the dock, or he may slip away and it may be another year. Sense of emergency is get to the dock because he's about to board a spelljammer and he's going to leave the planet.
So,
and you'll never see him again.
This, I
difference
think,
between urgency and emergency.
Goes back to the question I asked you earlier that kind of wasn't the topic, which was, when do you use this? And the reason why I say that is because what you're talking about is basically changing what your players' focus is like. They could be focused in 5 different directions.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Everybody's over here, you're over here, you're trying to do that, you're trying to do that. And this is the thing that, like, unites them and, like, brings them back to, like, a different worldview.
100%.
Right? And so it's
that's why it's an emergency, because it's a thing that...
You want to use it for the express purpose to take them away from whatever it is that they were doing. Not necessarily...
Oh, no. That part is all up to the DM. Now, if the
that's what I'm saying.
But if the DM says, hey, I'm not getting group cohesion... Like, okay, let's take the military example. If the DM is having problems with group cohesion, the players aren't getting along, they don't play their characters quite well enough together, throw something like this to them, trauma bond them. Make them come together and realize, holy shit, we are better as a team. That's one, and that's an encounter, right? Like, because I said, this can be anywhere from a campaign, or a section of the campaign, or down to an encounter. This could be just literally, this could be your downtime. You could have something that, like, okay, think about a sense of emergency. You all get out of a battle. There's no combat. You're all in a bar. You're all getting your drinks. You're just talking. You're chit-chatting. You're just, it's after game stuff. And then you're like, by the way, you guys start smelling smoke. There's smoke coming from the back of the bar and you don't see the bartender. Just have them do a let's put out the bar and save the bar moment. That's a sense of emergency. It has nothing to do with the plot. No one's going to die. But guess what? If this is the bar...
They found out somebody was poisoned.
Right.
You could do the same thing.
But like let's say this is the bar that from day one, like this is the bar they always come to after an adventure. It's the party's bar. It has nothing to do with the campaign. It's not going to change anything, but it's the party's bar. And you're just like, by the way, you smell smoke. And the smoke's getting black. Like, You're escalating it, but does it matter? They could walk away. But emergency says, wait a second, my bar's on fire.
If there's something happens, like there will be irreparable damage. And so
and that's my thing is a sense of urgency would be you hear a scream outside. Sense of emergency is, do you want to have this consequence? Again, has nothing to, it doesn't have to change. That's why I'm saying it could be on any level. So answer your question better, when a DM should use this is when you want to make a campaign if you suffer from players who like to derail campaigns, you set this as the campaign standard. That's the top level. This is a reason why a DM would do this. Either you would just have a difficult group and you just need them to focus on the campaign this time, so you make a campaign they can't walk away from. Like
that's the whole everything behind it. So either you're here for this or you're not in this campaign.
That's one option. Yeah. Another option that you would do the whole campaign for is your players are getting bored with the standard campaigns and you're just like, I want to spice it up. Like, nothing's wrong with your players. Your players take it just fine. But you just want to make... The world's going to fucking end, guys. Like, you just want to make it spicy.
I mean, apocalypse, man.
Those are two reasons why you would do it top level. At a basic, like, a section level, again, you've been following the BBEG. You're almost catching up to him. This is his chance to get away. Or you find out... he plans on getting away before you get to him. So you have a chance to go sabotage. Like, you have a sense of urgency. You have 3 days to go sabotage the boat he's going to use before he gets on it. You have 3 days to do this. And if you don't, 50-50 chance that he gets away before you get to him. That's, again, sense of emergency.
Or there was that other one that you were talking about maybe...
Or that would be urgency. That would be a sense of urgency.
This is going to level up the BBEG for when you eventually fight him. Like, say you just found out somehow that he was going to some island to train, right? And he was going to go train. He was going to learn some new technique that he was going to be able to use on you guys in the final fight. But you guys have the ability to stop him. Either you go there and you talk to the dude and see, hey, don't train him, or you just assassinate that dude just straight up. You sabotage his means to get there in the first place. Whatever the case may be, you do something to stop this so that, but if you don't stop it, then he goes there. He trains, he learns, and now it's going to make your end game that much harder.
Exactly. So,
I see that.
And that's what I'm saying is like, those are really good examples of like why I would do that, right? Let's say you have a BBEG that you have built, but you are like us. You don't want to just be the DM that says, well, I don't like you guys today, so I'm just going to buff him. But let's say you also know you have smart players and you're like, I know they have the chance of beating this guy, because you don't want to ever make a BBG that you know is just too strong. But you're like, I don't know if they're going to be able to make him, right? So this could be an opportunity for you to make versions of the BBEG. And these are tests. If they pass the test, you know that the BBEG is too strong or not strong enough, right? Like, so if you want to, basically see if your players are getting like too difficult, you throw these at them in order to make the final fight more difficult, because they're getting too good.
That's kind of crazy, because I think about it kind of like, okay, you know how in some I was just playing the Ghost of Tsushima, right? And when there's this one ability that you can go get, right? And it's where you can like light your blade on fire, right?
Ooh, okay.
And it's really cool. You do a stupid amount of extra damage, all this extra stuff. And a lot of your techniques are like unblockable in this mode. But it's something that you can go out and you can learn to do, right? And so, but when you get to like the final spot, once you finally get to the point where you can learn this, you have to fight against it in like a one-on-one duel. You have to like go up against it. And so I think a lot of the times when we're talking about like, hey, we can almost test our players, we can send them out here to go up against like a weaker version of this thing to see if when they do get up to the BBEG, if that's something that they could even handle. Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
I feel that.
So that's another way that you can, if the players are starting to feel, if you're feeling like the players are getting too good for this campaign and the BBG isn't spicy enough, you can throw this in there to give an option to level them up. During an encounter, this could be a way to, let's say that it's a filler episode Like, we all have those where it's like, man, I'm
Yeah.
just not feeling it. I need it, but we're having a gaming session tonight.
Somebody's
throw in
missing or something. You just do a shopping episode or...
Yeah, or so throw in a sense of emergency encounter. That's why you would do it in an encounter version. It's not going to plot change anything. Like, again, they're on their way somewhere. You don't have anything planned, but this is going to happen in this town, right? Like, there's a cult, and they're basically going to do the whole mass take their whole cult members. So you come into this town, you discover the cult, you discover their plan. It's a sense of emergency, but it doesn't change your plot device. You will not change your main campaign, but it is kind of a filler episode, right? It's there's like 100 people that are going to die,
It's some
and this
character development extra.
and you can even throw in, like, again, what we'll talk about here in a minute of, like, why it matters is you can even throw in, like, hey, not only is that cult like going to kill 100 people, but all of those 100 souls are going to be tied to the god of the BBEG. And maybe you just throw it in there, right? Like, so those are some of the reasons why I would throw it in there. It's not just to force players to, it's not just for me to intentionally interject an emergency that I want them to deal with,
Right?
Which could be it. Maybe I just want them to handle something in High Point and they're just nearby, so I kind of throw it on them. But it also could just be that, I want to spice things up. I want to just have them focus more, or I just need them to kind of work together, and they're not. And it's like, hey guys,
I
you don't have a
definitely
choice.
like that idea of I know it sounds aggressive calling it trauma bonding, but I mean that's
It's what it is, man. It's trauma
lightweight
bonding.
What it is, man. You just out here putting you through some crazy stuff together, and it's like, yo, you really saved my butt back there. You really looked out for me. I wouldn't have been able to do this without all of you, because you guys were all right here through the thick of it,
right?
And, so
and even if you don't even if you don't do the whole, like, family matters, hug it out afterwards.
Yeah.
Afterwards, you're all sitting there bloodied and just being like, thanks. And then after that, it's like, okay, I won't argue with you anymore. Like, you did save my life. Like, we're not buddies, but all right, fine. Well, let's go beat this BBEG together. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there's something that like the players will at least take away from something like that. So good question though of why you would want to do these things, right?
Yeah.
Why do you want, instead of, because we I think there is plenty of options to make a sense of urgency, but a sense of emergency can heighten
and
a lot of aspects.
that was the biggest thing. It's like I was having trouble separating the two in
Totally
my
understandable.
mind.
And it was a good question, because I didn't really I didn't really think about that, but those are two different approaches.
Very much so. Very much so.
And I think that the sense of urgency could be its own episode like this, because again, it has a different. I think they do have a different meaning, right?
And
I
a
think,
different overall purpose. Like they can.
yeah, I think at the end, if I were to just put a line in the sand, the biggest two differences are consequence. 100%. It's what the consequence is, whether it's a long, permanent, actual consequence versus this would just have been beneficial to us to do sooner, and the, like, investment value of that consequence, right? Like how much it affects the players in terms of their investment level, right? If it's going to make the game a little bit longer, okay, that's not the worst thing. But if it's literally going to stop the game full stop, or literally make the game impossible, or ruin something that we all love, that's going to be one
Higher
of those,
stakes.
a little
Very
higher
much so.
stakes, and you kind of want them to feel for that, right? Which actually goes into a couple other of our core values, because we're still in the core values,
Right.
So another one that we've also kind of been dancing around, we just haven't nailed down the title of it yet, or the name of it, is scaling urgency. Now, I wrote down the term in here before we got into the debate between emergency and urgency.
Right.
But this actually also makes sense too, because scaling urgency in an emergency situation is the same thing, because we talk about urgency is we need to do this sooner than later. Emergency is we need to do this or else. But in a we need to do this or else situation, you can have a we need to do this sooner or later or else.
Yeah, exactly.
So
it's like it'll be worse if we don't do it sooner. We could wait, but at a certain point, it'll cut off, and it'll be the end of
Exactly.
things. You know.
So scaling urgency is essentially, in my opinion, when you're planning this, is not what happened. This is not what is the things that are going to happen against the players if based on their choices. Scaling urgency, in my opinion, is what did you plan to have happen regardless of the player interaction, right? Like we talked about the volcano. The volcano is going to get, more aggressive. It's going to spew things. It's going to, before it really explodes, it's going to go through phases. That's scaling urgency. That shit's happening in the background regardless of if the players are doing anything or not, right? It's just going to get more aggressive. That spell is going to get, if you're talking about the mage doing a major spell, he's going to get louder. The spell is going to get more chaotic. Maybe there's lightning that happens, right? Maybe the wind starts blowing crazy.
It could be like legit bolts of lightning come down and will like actually do damage in certain areas, like certain
or just
random
striking
areas.
him, right? Like, you imagine the idea that, scaling urgency is happening regardless the closer you get. Like, scaling urgency could be, hey, the closer you get to the volcano, the hotter it's going to get. That's scaling urgency. It's just things that are happening that are only going to get worse just because, right? And those, I think, again, you're not setting these up ahead of time. You're not telling these. We're past the setting the scene.
A really good example earlier about a volcano with, lava starting at the top. But if you wait too long, that lava is going to be at the bottom, and then you're going to have to fight your way through all that lava to get to the top.
Right. And that will go into a secondary one, too, which would be like progressive consequences, right? Because these kind of go hand in hand, right? Because you have the scaling urgency,
yes.
which is just going to happen regardless. And that's in one direction, right? No matter what, the closer you get to your objective, or just in general, I have benchmarks, this thing is going to start happening because it's happening. But in the opposite direction, right? Well, what happens if the players don't do it in time? Or what happens if they start to lollygag, or they start to fail at doing things? That's where you get into progressive consequences. How are things going to get worse the less the players do, right? And that's where there's those two mindsets. You want to have things that are going to happen regardless of the players, and then things that are going to happen because the players aren't acting, right? And that's those sense of urgencies. So you brought up the idea of the lava, right? You could say that, hey, the first it's, they're going to hear explosions happening from the volcano, then it's going to start doing smoke, and then there'll be lava at the very top when they get up there. That's all the scaling urgency. But the progressive urgency could be, well, if they don't get up there within a certain time frame, that lava is no longer going to be at the top. It's now going to be at the base. So by the time they get there, now they have to fight through the fact that there's lava at the base, but they still have to get to the top. Whereas before,
and then whatever they got to do at the top, still, yeah.
And beforehand, they weren't supposed to reach the lava until the top. That was supposed to be a final obstacle, but the progressive consequence of not doing things led to you seeing that obstacle sooner. And I think both of those go great hand in hand, because you can have things that, again, are regardless, but have things that are also caused by the players.
On that note, do you think that the value of those things is lost at least a little bit if the players don't realize that they are the consequences of their own actions? Meaning, if the players didn't know that because they took so long, the lava was now at the bottom, maybe they thought in their mind the lava was always going to be at the bottom. Like, do you think it's helpful for them to know that, for them to recognize?
I think it's 100%, to answer your question, 100% it is lost on them. And that is where, once I have one or two more cores, and then we're going to get into the accessories, the ones that help. And that one we'll cover first, because absolutely that is in the accessories category of how to make all of these cores better. Because yes, if you just do all of these things, like if you just set the setting, who cares, right? If you don't have a time frame, who cares? Like, these are all things that in a bigger combination will help. But yes, if you just have those things planned but don't represent them properly, they will be absolutely lost. They'll just get there and just assume the lava was always there, right? But we do have ways to help get around that. Oh, actually, no, sorry. It's not in this accessories. It is the next core concept. My bad. My notes are a little bit jumbled here. So with the progressive and the progressive consequence and the scaling urgency, right? You bring up a good point. How do the players know that these things are against them? You could state that all in the very beginning.
Part
right?
of setting the scene.
I don't like doing that, because it's the same thing as giving too much exposition when you start a campaign, right? When you give them 15 paragraphs of lore, it's like, we don't need all of this. I don't understand it. So another core aspect that we have here is, I think what you were alluding to, and my notes were not good enough, but clues and reminders. And these are important to overcome exactly what you're talking about is, if you don't want to set the stage and tell them right up front, hey, here's what you have to do, here's how long you have, and if you don't do things by this point, here's what you're going to expect. If you don't want to do all of that, right? Nobody really wants that. But if things are going to get worse, you have to let the players know they're getting worse, right? So clues, reminders, things like, hey, you see the smoke starting to happen. Like that wasn't happening before. Hey, it's starting to look like lava's coming out, but it's still way up there. Time goes by. Lava's starting to come down the side of the mountain. Hey, lava's getting closer to the city. Hey, lava's all the way at the base of the mountain now. Like, these are things that you would let them know were happening over time, letting them know that their path is getting more difficult. Other clues, right? One thing I like when you have like a BBEG and you want to keep reminding them, because sometimes they get distracted with other side missions, doing things like having things or obstacles happen or situations that are against the group, like, you know, a friend gets kidnapped or someone gets assassinated or a place gets broken into. And after a while, it looks kind of like an accident, or at face value, it looks like, you know, benign. But then you leave behind like a small clue, like a calling card from the BBEG, just to let them know it was them. And just, it's that callback of, fuck, we got to get to that, right? The another one, if you're dealing with like the volcano one, right? Let's say, you know, you want to remind them, like, you guys are dealing with this volcano, right? You guys not remember, you know, you're dealing with this guy over here. Do you not remember the big thing? Oh, okay. Instead of just forcing them, being like, hey guys, you need to go back to the mission, throw them an earthquake. I think you were alluding to that earlier, of just have it planned out where it's like, hey man, once a day, or progressively, on the first day, there's no earthquakes. On day 2, there's 1. Day 3, there's 2. On day 4, there's 3. On day 5, there's 5. And you just keep doing that to where it's like, and that causes damage, right?
Yeah.
It would cause damage to the town.
When you were talking about, hey, I want to remind them, just imagine you were getting like really close and like rocks were spewing out the top and they're just doing something else. And an entire rock just comes and smashes a building that they're in, or right next door, or something like that. And it's just like, hey guys, by the way,
do you not remember this is happening? Oh, can you imagine?
Let's destroyed around you.
Let's say you have one of those groups where they found like a type of enemy that they can farm around this area, because you just decided that something's wild in this area, and they're like, let's just go farm it for stuff.
We need a whole lot of those to make this one magic item.
So throw an earthquake, like a very traumatic one, or even just a light one. But throw an earthquake mid one of those battles, especially if they're like on the edge of winning the battle. Throw an earthquake in, and then just, because again, it's one of those things where, again, you don't have to be the dick DM that says, well, it's going to happen just because I say it so. But it's like an earthquake you can just randomly make happen, and it's justifiable. That could change the tide of battle, right? All of a sudden, everything's disadvantage. The entire battle is now disadvantaged because everyone's shaking.
And you got, it's difficult terrain to move anywhere, you know.
Like, you could literally just screw up a whole combat just because they've been fucking off, right?
You got to make a saving throw just to use your movement. That would be so crazy.
So yeah, so anything like that, right? Like, again, like if let's say it's just an encounter base, we were talking about like the wizard to cast a major spell. Have it to where after a while, if they're worrying too much about the minions and they're not going after the main guy and they're not even trying, have the guy start shouting the spell, the spell really gets increased, right? Hey, good morning into Germany. How are you?
Oh, well,
it's been a while since we've seen you.
Yes,
I hope that you've had a great week, and I hope that you have a good Friday coming ahead of you.
I think.
Or Saturday? Saturday. It should be Saturday to you. Yes, yeah, Saturday. It'll be Saturday. Yeah, exactly. Good morning on your Saturday.
But isn't their item coming up soon?
Yes, actually. Do you want to take a look, bro? Let's see. That right. is true. I believe we do have Hoilepa's coming up. We had Impenetrable Warrior, and then we have...
Where are we at?
Yeah, I think it is. I think it's Impenetrable Warrior, because then we're skipping all the Goblin ones. So it should be,
Impenetrable Warrior. We did
the Cursed
that one.
Flag.
We did the Portable Tank. Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So on Monday, we're doing yours on Monday. If you can make it, we will be doing the Cursed Flag on Monday.
Very nice. Very nice. It's 5:20 a.m. on Saturday.
Oh,
very nice.
Rough. Well, I'm glad that you were able to join us and check it out. Thank you so much for popping in. We really do appreciate that. And let us know what you think about the new camera setup. We're testing this out a little bit.
Right, nice little new setup.
But yeah, so I really think that putting in clues and reminders, they can be obvious or they can be subliminal in the background, maybe just letting them know that they smell sulfur every now and again or something like that. Just keeping them aware that emergency is still happening, regardless of you want to do it, right? Because again, the whole concept of what we're talking about is how to keep them engaged, how to get the players involved with the emergency. And I stream at 4 a.m. Rough. But you know what I mean? Like, it's one thing to just say, hey, here's what we're playing today and here's the goal. But you want both the players and their characters to care about that goal. You want them to care about trying. And by doing some of these things in combination with, like any combination of these will help bring that out, right? It'll continue to bring out more of that desire in your players to want to succeed, more so than just playing the game, right? You always want to succeed to play the game,
right?
But you want them to feel these. That's why I say it's a sense of emergency, because you want them to feel this loss. This isn't just I want to do this all the time. This isn't a way that you make your entire game. You can do a campaign based off of an emergency, but that's
even then,
to
the
be
whole
focused.
Campaign is not an emergency.
Yeah,
like,
it's not every second is
yeah.
stressful. It's a way to keep them focused on a task, but keep them engaged.
And I think
want
that's
to focus
another
on it.
aspect of what I was getting at when it's like, hey, when do we want to use this? Like,
yeah,
how is this? Is this like, hey guys, I need you guys freaking out 24/7, or is this just more like, hey, just as a little reminder, there's some craziness happening.
Yeah, don't forget what's going on. It was a 5-minute build. Don't worry if it's don't worry. We absolutely are always okay, especially if things are in process of building. We're always interested in providing our reviews, and then if the item does get an update, we always would be willing to have it back on.
Yeah,
and we will do a 2.0 review.
We did that with one of mine. I added some changes to the
and even Cosmic. Cosmic has a couple that he'll be resubmitting. I think exactly. Later down the road too. So yeah, absolutely. We'll take it in and we'll give you our normal, very unbiased, neutral opinion of it. We won't go too hard or anything, but absolutely, if you do improve it, feel free to resubmit it. It's fantastic. That would be fantastic. I'm totally okay with doing 2.0 versions of resubmittals, as long as they've been like substantially changed, right? If you just changed one item, maybe not, but if it goes through with like a substantial improvement or an upgrade, I'm totally I'm totally down to relook at it. And then in the final core aspect I want to get back to on the sense of emergency is so the theme today, sense of emergency, is that's the sense of emergency is our theme today. And we've already talked about this too, this last core concept for creating sense of emergency. We've mentioned it almost every other one, but we just haven't said it by itself, which is basically the player and or character connection to the emergency. Because it's one thing, again, to just say, hey, you guys could hop on this boat, go to that continent over there, and get in there in the nick of time to stop this bad thing from happening. Yeah, we could, but I could also stay here and do what I was doing, right? But if you find out that, that fancy artifact that you need to kill the BBEG, the whole purpose of this campaign, it's about to be destroyed on that other continent. And you have exactly enough time to hop on this boat and go get it, or you have to fully discover a new way to kill the BBEG, or your entire plan can't happen. That's a completely different approach of, wow, that matters to us. Yeah. I want to kill that guy, and not having the weapon to do that would really be a bummer. But it could be anything from, you guys are going to die, right? And that one's not always the greatest, because I feel like every combat, you're always there. But, in a more spectacular way, like, a death spell, or a
more assured way. It's like, I could lose some health, but I also could heal. I also could resurrect. But out here, maybe it's just like, sorry, it's a if you don't stop this, give me your character sheet, you're done. Yeah. So that's making a character connection, or even the player connection again. And the players versus character, it can be individualized to the characters. It could be just what the party wants, or it could be to the players, right? Like, especially if you have gaming worlds like ours, where players are invested with multiple characters, they have different storylines, and so they have different agendas. Yeah. If you make that emergency, even if it's not specific to that player's character right now, it'd be so funny. You threaten one of their other characters.
Or you could, again, let's say there's no justifiable way to get that player involved because the character they're playing. Let's just say that there's no way to get that character involved. But you say, by the way, it's in such and such place. and such other artifact would be destroyed. Now, to this party, no one cares. You're having some like aristocrat name off the tragedies of what will be lost. But what you're doing is you're naming things that their other character needs. Like you tell them like there'll be like a tablet of some information. They're like, wait, that's the tablet on my dad, or that's a tablet on the guy I'm looking for. Like, now granted, it won't do anything for that character, but that player's like, wait, would you literally destroy that like all campaigns wide?
I mean, bro, like you don't really want to do nothing about it. Like
I am
you might
100%
way.
okay if you have players who have multiple characters and you have a combined world, right? Now, if you have just one of those ones where they're all separate and they never interact, that's one thing. But if you have it to where all of your world is all connected and all of your players are essentially connected, I am 100% okay threatening their other players and threatening the player directly, even though it has nothing to do with this character. You know what I mean? Like that to me would make it more fun because again, the player's now involved.
You know what's hilarious? I just see the moment where a DM does this to the player who always says, "Well, that's not what my character would do." Well, that's not what my character would do. And be like, "Okay, that's not what your character would do." Guess what? Something your character wouldn't do is going to make sure that character over there never sees the light of day or never achieves a goal. So what's your character going to do now? Is he just going to be like, well, sucks to suck? And sometimes that'd be very interesting.
Hoylepa has another add-on for us too is, feeling of helplessness. I think we kind of covered that a little bit, but not specifically of like, going out to fight a dragon, but on a boat. But the difference between that is that seems pretty perilous. It's already pretty, tough. But then adding the fact that he lights your boat on fire. So that's another thing of, do you repair the boat? Do you just try to kill him quicker, but then you lose the boat? Do you try to repair the boat, but then maybe just, not? Yeah. So yeah, so there's a lot of different ways that you can approach making that sense of emergency. Again, time restriction, some things that you may have missed so far that we kind of gone over is, setting the scene, having some time restrictions, having a lost consequence, having a progressive consequence, so the longer they don't do it, like, their lack of action makes things worse.
So I actually have a question, and this is, again, something I'll bring up from the game Ghost of Tsushima that I played. This is actually something that I kind of didn't like about it, but I'm not saying that because it was bad. I have a hard time being forced to make these types of decisions. But it's not to say that it isn't a valuable tool, and it's that making them make one of those, and I hate these choices where you have to choose between A or B. Like one of them's gonna go down. You just got to pick which one dies, right? Like there was a moment where there were literally two camps and there were two people that needed to be saved and they were on both sides, but there's only one of you. So literally whichever one you go engage with, the other one instantly dies.
So we do have that. So we've talked about all the core concepts, and then we said that there was a second category of like how to enhance, like enhancements. Right. So that is one of the ones I have on here is moral dilemmas. So how to enhance what we've talked about, right? So we've talked about setting the scene. We've talked about scaling urgency, things that will, regardless of the player's actions, will just progressively get harder because of the emergency. We've talked about setting a time restriction and being specific on exactly how long they have or what benchmarks, until they fail. We've talked about lost consequences, where it's what happens if you don't, make them meaningful, make them permanent, because that's the difference between an emergency and an urgency situation. Progressive consequences, basically consequences for the player's delay. The longer they take, the more consequences will happen. Setting clues and reminders to keep them constantly, refreshed and keep them focused. And then making it connected to the player or the character, right? Making the emergency matter to them. So with all of that, to enhance all of that, adding a moral dilemma at any point, being the thing of, you have to, in order to solve this problem, you have to be given a very hard choice, one that you don't want to make, right? It's one thing to say, hey, your favorite tavern is going to burn down. Well, we should put out the fire. But putting out the fire, the way that you have to do it right now, is probably going to mean that half the people in the town go without clean water because you're going to contaminate the water, right? Like by putting out the fire, you contaminate the water. What do you do? Like,
Right.
so we just let the place burn, and I like that idea of making a moral choice, making a choice whether it's character specific,
So
or like making a cleric decides who dies.
I had to run a one shot for a group of people, and it was actually I think it was a People's Paragon campaign, and one of the things that I did is I had these people. Their job was to just go uncurse a sword. Right? They had this special magic scroll that could remove the curse from the magic weapon itself, right?
Okay.
This is very rare thing.
Right,
Like, you don't
right.
really get to do that a lot. Mostly you just remove the curse. And
That's actually a cool campaign concept. I like that.
it was just a random like little one shot for these people, so that like because all these things are kind of like one shots. Anyway, so the job was, so basically the kind of premise behind the curse is super standard. You touch the thing, it kind of makes you want to do whatever it wants you to do, makes you a little bit more aggressive, this and that, blah blah.
Right.
Blah,
Don't want to let it go. Blah
so
blah blah.
the adventuring party had found it, a random adventuring party had found it in a dungeon somewhere. One of their players had started acting weird when they'd come back from the quest, so they immediately were like, oh shoot, this thing might be cursed, let's get it off of him. So then they gave the sword to a cleric because it had a bunch of religious symbols on it, and he was just, looking at it. He was checking it out, trying to see what was going on with it. And he was the one caring for it while this other party was supposed to bring this uncursed scroll to it. Well, little did they know, he was doing a lot of research. He found some stuff out about it. He got a little curious, ended up touching it, ended up being affected by it, right? And there was a whole bunch of like weird stuff, a bunch of misdirection, sending him one direction or somewhere else. Eventually, they found this cleric, and he was transforming villagers with this blade into zombies, right? Mm-hmm. And so he had been fully affected by it, and eventually they had to get to the point where this cleric was technically just a regular dude, but they had to figure out whether they were going to stop him and kill him, or they were going to try and just wrestle the sword away from him. They had a way to contain this thing. They had a vessel that they could hold it in, but could they get it away from him? Were they gonna have to kill him? Type deal. It's like, he was one of us. He was a good guy. All these zombies that you're killing, they were villagers. How do you go about dealing with this situation? Do you try to like bring them back? Whatever the case may be. But,
right. And that's the thing too. It's like, just giving them the option is like, well, do you kill them? Most players will kill them, which is why it's like, how do you make that option
less attractive?
Yeah, and that's the other thing too. It's like, because you don't want to do the cliche of like you let them kill them all and then they find out after the fact, unless of course they denied looking for any alternatives, right? If they just went straight for the death option, But it would be, very fascinating. Like, or you could say, something along the lines of, you kill all the zombies, you kill him, you undo the curse, and then the god gets pissed off at you because all of those zombies were the followers. And he's like, why did you kill them all? All of my followers are dead. Like, they were zombies, but by removing the curse, it removes that spell. So essentially now they're all just dead people. So had they not killed the zombies and went straight for the guy and undone the curse, everyone would have been instantly cured. Even the cleric would have been. But by assuming that you just kill everything and then undo it, now you have everybody who has no effect whatsoever and a god watching a group of adventurers around slaughtered followers. Like, you could have
that's very
such a cool concept.
Weirdly enough, I didn't think in my mind as the DM that they could have just like jumped up there and
just touched it and
just grabbed onto the sword, got rid of it just like that. Like, that would have been I would have loved that outcome, and I would have wanted to like undo all the just like that. That would have been
that would have something like that would be fantastic. Cool. So moral dilemmas is a good way to enhance all of these. A couple other things that we've kind of danced around too. So sudden or surprise effects, basically, like not telling them that an earthquake will happen the longer it takes them to stop the people trying to aggravate the volcano, right? It's natural. It's not going to surprise anybody it's happening, but it's going to be sudden, right? Maybe like, again, if you're in a combat with that mage, maybe the like the gusts of wind start kicking up suddenly halfway through the spell, right? Like you see that in TV,
Right.
where as the spell kicks up, like, just shit,
just
lightning starts
starts-
striking.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
sudden things that were never expected, but will just start happening. And not so much like the clues and reminders portion. This is kind of an enhancement of the clues and reminders, but it's also tying in with like scaling the urgency. It's just those things where making things sudden snaps them back into, maybe we should just take care of that, right? We can't predict what's happening anymore. Let's move on, right? This one I think we both really, really like too. This is one of the best tools in any DM's toolkit. Outside of this situation, this is one of, hands down, the best DM tools that you have. But one of my favorites to use in an emergency situation, like when you're trying to create a sense of emergency, once you've set that good scene, the moment you've made them focus on this, right? It's not just like a main task, but it's an emergency. They're already kind of on alert. They're already like, we're going to lose something if we don't do it. To constantly just twist that knife of anxiety. I love doing things and giving my players absolutely no information. Controlling information, or specifically
Yes.
controlling the lack of information, is one of the DM's greatest tools, because doing things like rolling a dice in front of them and never saying a word, that is one of the most powerful moves a DM can do at any time, especially when
definitely a power move.
especially when the players are already anxious, and you just and then just move on.
Especially when they have some like weird reaction where they like giggle at it, like, oh my goodness.
Oh, I love that.
Why you gotta look like that?
I just love the
Why you
no
gotta look
reaction.
like
I just love the. There's just that's what it is. Okay, like, so, but then it could be everything from you make an NPC start to act weird or say something cryptic. They find a cryptic note. Like, the idea of lack of information is making something happen but with no narration, right? Like, you want something abnormal to happen, so suddenly they turn around and a door is just gone, or a new door appears in the room and then they open it and it's just a brick wall. Then you never mention it again. You give them no information. It contextually doesn't do anything, but it's just enough to kind of freak them out and make them question, what are you thinking? What are you
I
doing
will
as
say,
the DM?
even if there is something behind what it is that I'm doing and I don't tell them, I personally have had issues with players just brushing it off and like not engaging with it at all, and like completely,
and that's where you
know,
need consequences, right? That's why you want those progressive consequences, because if you're
Yeah.
doing these things to enhance their their interest or their involvement, and they're still not being involved, consequences will always start the involvement, right? And that's where it's like, again, like with the volcano, just start destroying things before the big destruction.
Yeah.
Just the whole point is you have to push the envelope a little bit.
because I really like putting stuff in there. Like, say I will have like an NPC mention something cryptic, but that cryptic thing that they mentioned is directly tied to something that means something to their backstory, right? Or something that's associated with that player. Like, I would think that's gonna bring you right in, but a lot of the times they're just like shrug emoji, and I'm like, all right, well,
And that's one of the that is 100% one of the hardest things about being a DM, is just
Which
learning
is-
your players and what
which
gets
is
to them.
why so often most of what I do is I just let them lead. I let them go where they want to go. But I definitely like having things to present to them, right? It's like I have an idea. Like, there was this one encounter that I had like totally planned out, and I still want to do it. Like, I don't know if I have all the notes and stuff for it, but like it was gonna be like a legit ambush. Like, I'd never actually set out, because I like the strategy and like the chess element of D&D as well, right? You know, adding some planning in there, using some strategy, using some like range and all this. Most of what I do actually is just seat of the pants, and so I don't really have a lot of time to like plan and strategize and do all this extra. But if I can set something up ahead of time and just find a place to insert it, kind of like we'd been talking about before, I think being able to do stuff like this, like you said, maybe on the encounter level, you know, rather than like, you know, the whole campaign or like a bigger section level, but like on a encounter level, setting something like that up and just being able to use it in a time that's necessary, or a time that you can just see fits a scenario or a situation, like the bar burning idea, just like having some, I don't know if you want to call it mechanic or like response for something like that. I don't know. But I definitely struggle with that sometimes, is knowing how to actually invest them into whatever it is that I've presented.
Yeah, it's hard to learn your players like that. So another way too that I like to really bring in that sense of urgency, like another way to capture players' attention, is by limiting or creating a sense of depleting resources. Because a lot of the times players get that sense of it doesn't matter because everything around them typically doesn't matter, right? They rarely run out of ammo. They don't run out of magical components. They sleep and they get all their shit back. Like a lot of the times, it's not until they're down to the wire. We've talked about this a lot, like with how to improve hit points, everything. It's not until they're down to the wire that they care. And a lot of the times, creating a sense of emergency is the same way. They're not going to care until it's, oh, now we have to matter. So whether you're doing it from the very beginning or in the moment, having some sort of necessary resource that has some sort of limitation on it, whether it's, you have something that will get you closer, but you can only use it so often, so you need to be careful how often and when you use it. Or you only have so many. Or suddenly what you thought you had plenty of, you've now had, a leak, or you've had something it, something thievery.
Stolen.
But having some sort
Squirrels.
of, having some sort of detriment, right, to a resource that's necessary is one of those things where making the characters aware of their management, again, keeps them focused, right? Because that's what we're really talking about. Was when we talk about keeping them invested, it's keeping them focused, because investment just means desired focus. They can be focused on it just because it's the game, but you want them to want to be focused on it. You want them to want these things. And in order to do that, you have to get them to think about them in some way, right? You have to make it challenging and fun.
It has to be in their attention.
Yeah, yes. It has. You want it to be urgent, but you also want it to be fun. That's another main part about any of these that you can do, is you need to make urgency, but you need to make that urgency kind of fun. But that's why I also like the difference between urgency is one thing, but you want to make the fun of it in the whole, like, this is fun, but I also really, really, really don't want to lose. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's a fine line to get that balance of having them have a lot of fun, but really like stressed out about the stakes, because you don't want to like lean it into this isn't fun anymore. It's, you know what I mean? Like, you don't want to get it so stressed out to where the game's just kind of like over the top and not what they want anymore. Yeah. But yeah, urgent with fun is kind of a good motto to have. Outside of the depleting resources, another one that we've kind of mentioned before, but it's just kind of a good way to enhance some of the scaling urgency, or even the progressive consequences if they are delayed, is introducing new threats over time. So instead of just in the beginning when you're sitting in the scene, just laying out every last thing that they have to do out in excruciating detail, give them hints about what they'll accomplish or what they'll encounter, but then throw things at them, like new things that they weren't expecting or weren't told about before, right?
Right.
Like you could say, hey, the BBEG, you could say he has 3 guys that you have to get through before you get to him. You could start with that, or you could say the BBEG is protected, beware. And then you're like, okay, he got a bodyguard. You beat a bodyguard. And then out of nowhere, you throw another one. Right as you think you're going to get there, you throw a new threat that you didn't realize he had, right? Or you have like again, like the mage encounter, right? You have the 2 mages who were casting different types of shield spells. You would assume, okay, forget the minions. The minions are the distraction. I need to go after them first, so then I can go after the mage guy. But then you find out that the mage has like a wand that can also cast spells that he doesn't have to concentrate on. So you just think it's just these 2, and then you get in there, and now he has a 3rd magic casting aspect that you have to deal with, right? Throwing a new threat as time progresses. You just have to, as a DM, be very, very careful of not doing I'm doing this because I want to. The DM that says, oh, you beat this guy too quick, he wasn't the real BBEG all along. There's some guy with 4 times, you know, like you don't want to you don't want it to feel, oh, I have something else for you instead. But it's okay to feel that progressive threat happening in a way that makes sense and a way that makes it feel good, right? You don't want it to feel like you're throwing it out there because you're losing as a DM, but you also don't want it to throw it out there to make it seem like it's an impossible, like, okay, you're just going to keep giving me things and I'm never going to get this, right? It's there's no easy solution to that. It's just that whole pick and choose when you do it. But I think it's a good tool to have. You know, not letting them know all of their threats right out the gate, I think can be a lot more fun. Because it can be just one of those things where they're learning and they're experiencing it, and they can prep, but it's still kind of fun to get excited, you know, to get surprised and just be like, whoa, we were prepped, but not for that, right? Like maybe one of the guys, like one of the intermediate mini bosses that they know about, they don't know he has an assistant. So they prep for him.
Yes.
But they were like, what? Who is this other dude? Like, we just...
What even is happening here? They got an artificer buddy that knows how to build a whole bunch of gadgets or all kinds of other crazy shit.
Also, Halepa says there's also another point of tactics. So we have a horde of zombies and an archer as an enemy who deals a lot of damage.
Oh, yeah.
So again, it's that whole aspect of, you know, layering, right? You know, the zombies are there basically to distract you. They're not the real enemy. The archer is. He's the one that's really going to be hurting you.
Like these zombies are just going to keep coming at you unless you stop that dude or something.
And then you find out, and then again, like one of those things where it's like, again, the aspect of like you're going after somebody and then you find out that he was just hired by somebody else, like that kind of new threat introduction, right? It doesn't have to be a new threat like as in every time there's immediately something new to fight, but the new threat as in you make an accomplishment and then something else is discovered.
And it really plays to the point of having alternate goals, because it's really hard sometimes when, you know, again, you feel like your only goal is just swing until everything's dead, right? It's like, all right, well, if I'm just a squish bug army, then maybe I'll just run around and squish bug things, you know? But instead of having something like having a purpose, having something that's like, yo, I want this, that very much so that sense of investment for whatever reason.
Well, and then, you know, another way too is like, you know, when we say threats, we don't just mean enemies too. Like you were talking about before, you know, moral choices, making decisions over people. Like imagine having a situation where you give the players the choice to decide on like who's going to take a certain position, like a high, like, you know, commanding position or like a noble position. And you have the choice and you feel like you know pretty well what the two choices are, right? But maybe you find out later down the road as you're investigating that both of them come with a sinister side. So it's like one person says, hey, I'm going to do right by the people and people focused. I'm going to be, you know, lowering how much they have to pay into things. I'm going to help the people. And then the other person's like, I need to defend this place. Like we're weak. You guys are here helping us right now. I need to work. Like the people are fine. We're not going to like, you know, be tyrants, but I need to focus more on the military and the protection. And you're like, wow, that's a hard choice. Like you want to make life better here, but you want to make sure life stays here. And maybe the situation is you're actively defending the town and it can't defend itself. So it's like, you're the defense guy. Like he has the future in mind. You don't really seem to be thinking about the future, right? But then the new threat, after like right before you make the decision, you can add the new threat of you learn the guy who wants to help the people, totally fine, but he wants to completely remove the entire royal family. Not by like murdering them, but once he gets in, he wants to replace it with like a council. And you're just like, that's not how things work here. No one, this whole kingdom has been predicated.
Overthrowing an entire government rather than just, I'm here for the people.
But he's going to do it to help the people. But, and again, he's not in BBEG. He's just, you found out he's going to help the people by getting rid of the tyrants. But they're not bad tyrants, right? They're just nobles. But then you find out the guy who wants to bring up the forces, military. He wants to make military mandatory. He wants to make sure that people can't leave the town anymore. He wants to make restrictions on who can enter the town and like make like he wants to isolate it. So it's like, wow, you want to defend it, but you basically also want to cut them off. You want to help them, but you also want to like undo the entire culture. That's the new threat. that you thought these guys were just fine. And you don't do it in the whole like, oh, which one of these is really evil. You basically make it to where it's like these guys are even friends, and they're like, no, I'll totally help him if he makes it. But you get them the choice. But then right before they make it, you give them information where it's like, I don't want to make this choice. And again, these are all of those layers of these are new. Like we just layered new threats with lack of information, with sudden effects on top of the scaling urgency. Like all of these things, again, they're just ways that you can layer it to where that sense of emergency. Now, again, that whole thing of like, hey, we need to make this decision. You have to make a decision because guess what? If we don't start doing X, Y, Z now, bad things are going to happen. But this decision is going to not only deal with it today, but it's going to make this entire place change forever.
Here's a point that I would probably struggle with. Would you allow, and I know for you personally, I feel like, again, as long as the players can make it make sense, like for the most part, there's not a problem. Mm-hmm. But in moments like that, like moments where those moral dilemmas, because I'm very much a fan of the Kobayashi Maru. Mm-hmm. And the whole mentality, like that there is no unwinnable test. Like if I can find a scenario, if I can find an outcome where everybody wins, then I can go and seek out. But I mean, again, you have to actually go and do the thing. But, you know, so like in situations where it's either the military or being for the people, it's like, hey, are the players okay to come up with like a different third option, where come at it from a different angle? Or
I think it's okay for both. I think it's totally fine if you're running a situation, and in certain cases that would be a high point thing for sure. If I gave you two choices and you came up with an awesome third one, of course you can try. But in the prism, just from the perspective specifically in a sense of emergency situation, I like the fact that you don't have that. I like the fact that these aren't evil choices. It's not like it's ruining the game, but it's just a hard choice. It's one of those things of, yes, there is going to be some bad. You can't get around it. You're either going to free these people but destroy their culture, or you're going to save these people and lock them away from the rest of the world. Neither option is bad. They're not going to be hurt. They're still going to thrive. But unfortunately, by your actions and by everything that's happening, you are in the position to make this choice. And it's just, I love giving players 90% of the time. You know me. I love giving my players the agency to come up with their own solutions. But I think that those 10% of the time, it's absolutely okay. And I would even encourage just once in a while, don't give them a way out. Don't let them do that. Because again, sense of emergency, time frame, there's reasons you can justify it. But you don't want, just like any of this, you don't want any of this to be the predication of the entire gaming session every time, right? But in one gaming session, throwing a choice that just doesn't have a good way out, totally fine with it. I think that can spice things up. And again, it's that whole thing of like, now that character has to live with that choice. That's just, to me, I love those moments as a role play option for the character to grow. You can totally let the character change. Alignments can change. Like when people make shit like that happen, like when they have to make a hard decision, I'll let people change alignment because it can fundamentally fuck with their minds so much that they just, or it enlightens them. They're like, I've always been good. And then they find out sometimes being evil is good. So it changes their mindset of maybe I don't have to always be good as long as I'm doing the good overall, right? And that goes from lawful good to neutral good, right?
I very much can appreciate how that can add character to people and how that can work out in some situations.
Like everything, it's situation. To answer your question, I think it's absolutely okay to not give them the choice. I think more times than not I would. I think absolutely in any given day, they would have the choice, right? They would have another option if they don't like any of their choices. But in the prism of this is a isolated situation.
There are some scenarios where that might be prudent or necessary or even worthwhile. I have I mean, I again, like I said, I totally get how it can work, how it can be beneficial.
Again, it's all about when and where. It's all about placement, right? You don't want to do this too often. You don't want to make the players feel like they're always being railroaded. But in life, sometimes you just have to make a choice in the spot, right? And sometimes it could just be as simple as, hey, you have 5 seconds in real time. Grab the rope or jump. Just 5, 4, 3.
And that's what I'm talking about.
And
like
you can
that
even
is
do that
to me
in
a very different scenario than you got to side with these two people.
But I mean, again, it depends on the campaign, because I mean, I don't want to get too into the example. But like I said, in normal, I would say that normally I would offer it. But in this particular scenario, I don't see anything wrong with doing this once, like just throwing this out there, because to say that a DM, I would never suggest to a DM, I would never suggest you should always basically give them A or B, and that's all they have. I would never say that's how you should play. But I also don't agree with saying that you should never only have 2 options, right? Because that's not realistic either. Sometimes there's just going to be a case where it sucks whatever you choose.
And I think that's what I mean is, just like the Kobayashi Maru, I don't believe there's something called an unwinnable scenario.
And I think there is, and I think that can spice up the gameplay, right? Because you can say that you can give them all of the thinking time that they want, but again, from the character point of view.
Now, I'll say this.
And the situation,
I definitely believe that setting them up where, hey, no matter what, you got to make a choice. And if you can't come up with something else within whatever time period, then you have to make a choice. And if that choice is to do nothing, then that choice is to do nothing, and you accept whatever consequences comes with that. That I'm totally okay with. And I think that's along the lines of what you're talking about, is it's like, hey, in this particular scenario, you have X, Y, and Z time period. If I gave you 1,000,000 years, yeah, maybe you could come up with something. Maybe you could rewrite the whole test. Maybe you could do whatever the heck else it is that you want to do. But right now, you have these options and these tools and this time frame. What are you going to do? Mm-hmm. Now, if within that time frame, they come up with a beautiful third option, run with it.
Right. But and again, I would, like I said, 99% of the time, that's how I run my games. But in this scenario of this emergency is happening, no, I'm going to say you have this or this, choose. And if you don't choose, you like the end consequence that you always knew was going to happen. But I don't see any issue with, again, because if a player is going to come to me and be like, well, I don't like any of those options, it's like, so we're just going to derail the whole game because of one choice that...
No, that's the thing. I think you might be taking it a much further direction than I'm even referring to.
Well,
I'm not
talking
about derailing a campaign.
But you're saying that, yeah, I fully agree with you. You should always give them the choice to come up with their own option. But I'm just going to advocate that once in a while, no. Like, shut them off from any other option. Like, once in a while... That's just how it is. Like, it's just going to be a shitty choice. And
yeah, I 100% don't agree with that at all.
And and that's fine. I don't see why I have to always...
You don't have to do anything. Like, I'm saying that I don't see any benefit of taking away a player's choice to come up with something. And again, I'm saying I think
it raises the stakes. That would be the benefit.
I don't know what you mean when you say raises the stakes. I don't know how...
Because it gives them, it literally puts the choice on like one of 2 options. So you really have to weigh out everything, and it raises the stakes because that choice is all you have, right? There is no lessening those stakes. You either get that choice,
there's no lessening the
stakes,
yes, but there is making different choices. And I think there's difference between changing what the stakes are and making a different choice. And I think that that's where I would definitely diverge, is that I think that presenting a scenario and saying this is the facts of the scenario, and you don't get to change the facts of the scenario, and it sucks if you don't like the facts of the scenario, but that's what the facts of the scenario are, versus choose one or choose 2 and choose nothing else. I think those to me are 2 very different situations. And it's like, I'm totally here to present the facts of the scenario that are what they are. And if you don't like it, then it just sucks. right? You're just going to have to deal with the consequences. And sometimes that looks like doing nothing. And sometimes that's just allowing whatever that nothing is to occur. And if you don't like that, then yeah, it's just going to suck. But I don't necessarily feel like you have to, like in the whole Batman scenario, you know, kill Sarah or kill the Joker or kill Two-Face or whatever it was, like stuff like that, where it's like you have to do one or the other. You have to pull this lever. You have to be responsible for X, Y, or Z. I think
so. Basically, what you're saying is you don't agree with the trolley problem in D&D.
I don't agree with the premise of the trolley problem in general. Like, let alone D&D, just in general. I don't think that the trolley problem fully encompasses a real world scenario. I feel like the trolley problem puts unrealistic rules and walls in a hypothetical scenario that those rules and walls aren't going to actually be there when I were to run into that situation organically. Like, and what I mean by that is the trolley problem being like one person over here, 10 people over here, you know, you have to do the thing. And there's all these other scenarios, but whenever somebody tries to outthink the trolley problem, most people just say, you just have to answer the question.
Well, yeah,
it's just about answering the question. It's not about solving the problem. It's just about answering the question. And I think that premise puts on people to stop thinking of new ways to do things and just use what has been given to you.
Right.
And I think that a
lot of the times though, that's how a risk versus reward system is bid. You mean sometimes you only have the information that's in front of you in a very short amount of time. I mean, that's the whole concept behind it.
You can work with that. That I'm okay with. That I'm not talking of anything about. I'm talking about when you are outlining what your options are. That's different than saying this is the facts of the scenario. If I outline your options, if I outline what you can and cannot choose, I'm saying you don't get to choose this. You don't get to think outside of the box. You have to think inside my box. I think that a lot of the times, the majority of, and that's one of the reasons why I love D&D, is because D&D never tells you have to think inside this box. I mean, the whole premise of the game that we're talking about is beyond the book.
Our premise of the game.
Our premise is... Yeah,
I would say a lot of people would argue with you that D&D doesn't do that.
But my mindset, what I love about it, what I appreciate about the game is that everything we do in here is outside of the box. Like, the box is literally just the outline, and then we get to color wherever the heck we feel like, and we get to make this picture look like whatever we want it to look like. And that's what really gives me passion and gets me invested in the game. The second I'm told how I have to play, like, imagine if I'm in a video game and I only get to choose, between being, between a sword or a hammer, or whatever. Like, and I understand that sometimes there just aren't that many choices, there aren't a lot of options, but no matter what, like, I can take off my shoe, I can turn my pants into a lasso or a flotation device or whatever. Like, there's a million different ways to go about doing different things in the real world, in this place that we exist in. And I think that being able to explore those things is what I enjoy most about playing D&Ds, because I'm exploring all the different ways that I can approach these scenarios. Exploring all the different ways I can approach the trolley problem, rather than just I think we're
gonna end it here, though, just because we're getting a little bit past the time frame. But just as a small counter to that, even in the real world, though, there are times where you don't have the choice to think it through, right? You have to act. And that's where, again, the sense of emergency is what creates that, because
I agree with that.
And that's where I'm talking about, is when you have a situation where it's like, hey guys, you only have these options because you're suddenly presented with something, you have limited information, and this is...
So let me clarify.
Your
Are
option.
You trying to articulate that in the time of the game itself, and that you're trying to, it's almost like one of those moments where you're taking the reins back and you're narrating as the DM for a second. It's like, hey, in this moment, the only thoughts that are in your head are these two thoughts.
No, it's just more of, again, if we were to take the trolley problem into D&D, and again, we're going to have to end here after this, but if you take the trolley problem, you say, hey, you're on a train and you're realizing it's picking up speed. You walk up to the front and there's nobody at the conductor. All there is, and then you have 10 seconds in game. You're speeding ahead. You see one person on the track right now, but you do realize if you pull this, you can turn off. But at the last second, you see that there's 10 people on that track. Again, real life scenario, you literally walk into there. That's all the information you have. One person, 10 people, and all you have to choose is pull it or don't. It's a one or the other. There, you don't have any time to think. You never had this information before. You didn't know this track was on here. You didn't know the people were on the track. You didn't know there was no conductor on the train. There's no information. So that, like I'm saying, is like in the situation of a D&D campaign, I would never take player agency away unless the situation made sense, where it's like, okay, you walk into the train, you can do nothing and it'll hit this one person, or you can pull it and it'll hit 10, or vice versa. It'll hit 10 if you do nothing. If you pull it, it will hit the one person. That is the basics of the trolley problem. Is you have no other information. You walked into the train room or into the engine room. This is the situation, period, end of story. And that's why when people say you just have to answer, the reason for that is because the premise is you walked into the train and this is what you saw. You have no chance, no time. And that's why people want the whole, well, what would you do? Because the whole premise is you weren't on the train before. You didn't know this was happening. You had no prior understanding. And that's what I was trying to get at, is in a sense of an emergency in D&D, if I'm going to throw something at you, like I was using the advisor, like you have to choose. It's more like, okay, you've known these guys, you've had all this time to make your choice, but at the last second, like right before you have to make a choice, there are no other people. No one's going to accept anyone else. Like the whole townspeople, everyone, these are the only people they'll accept. And if you don't select one, I'll select them as a DM.
One will be picked.
But the point is these are the two choices. And at the last moment, you find out they both have a maybe not the greatest plan, but they're true to their word. They didn't lie. They're not evil. They're not going to hurt anybody. I'm trying to take all of the risk. The whole point is you just got a moral choice where you're just like, I don't like what either of you plan to do that I didn't know about. But because that moment happened, you're still expected to make a choice. Now you always can say, I don't make a choice, like whatever. Yeah. But the point is in that situation, will
still occur, for sure.
In that situation, what I was trying to articulate is I don't see a problem in not letting them discuss, well, what about a third? There is no third option. You don't get to take the place of the advisor. You don't get to nominate someone else.
See, in a situation like that, I would be like, all right, we make this decision, and then afterwards, all right, I want to go circumvent whatever that other city is trying to do.
That's different. But my biggest argument was, I'm not going to sit there and feel bad that they don't get to think of a third advisor, or why can't they talk the king into not having an advice? Like, stop. You guys just got this information. It's last minute. This decision is happening. That's what I meant by AB. I understand what you're saying is I don't like to railroad. We don't like to railroad. We don't like to force them to a point to where you guys could have stopped this, but I never let you. I'm just talking about once in a while throwing them in a situation where you don't like either option, but there has to be made one.
I do think we're in agreement on that front because, again, regardless of what you're talking about, every scenario that you've presented me has only been a scenario of I'm presenting you the facts, figure out what you want to do.
Yeah.
And that's, I'm 100% here for that, no matter what it looks like. Even if they feel like they only have one or two options, or they feel here are the facts.
And I'm okay with the aftermath concept. I was just advising that.
I totally get that.
I don't think that this should be all the time. Like, you should never just be like, here's your two options. But just that once in a while, just to, again, we're purely under the conversation of how to help instill a sense of urgency, is if you get them to think about it, there's still time.
Right.
When it's that you have a choice. What are you choosing, A or B?
And I love the clock too, like putting them on the spot, because in D&D, so often we feel like we can just put the game on pause and just think about it forever.
Exact metagaming, which is why you want to, and so that's why I was I think that's why I was so adamant about giving them lack of choices is a sense of urgency. It's that sense of It's not a sense of urgency, it's anxiety. It's anxiety of the emergency because they can't think any further. And once you've boiled it down, because also sometimes players think too much. So boiling it down helps to get them to only think about it. And now they have to weigh them both out. And it's like, I don't know. I think that can get more out of players because then they're like, did I choose the right one? And then they want to see what happens because then they have to deal with the fallout. And I think that's where I think your main argument was you just don't want to, hey, choose the king and that's it. You'll never get to do anything after the fact. And we were talking about like, whether or not they can fix it. I don't like when I was talking about like the fix of if the choice is your friend dies, like this NPC, he's going to die.
Back, yeah.
I'm not going to let you just go to the church and buy $2,000 worth of revive and nope, I got my friend back. That's what I mean by you don't get to undo it. If you choose an advisor and then you find out he's going to do something bad and you want to undo that later, that's different. You can't undo your choice. You can't undo that these are the only two people. But the game doesn't stop.
You can try and hit other dominoes that'll have other effects.
Exactly. Like that's just playing the game. But I think that limiting choices isn't as bad as long as it's tasteful, right? Again, like we talked about.
Very much so.
Don't railroad your players. Don't force them into a situation where they have no choice. But to make it feel more difficult.
Gritty.
Just, hey man, you don't have any more time. Here's your choices. Do you, like even just the BBG, you can knock him out or kill him. What do? Like, you walked up behind him, you have the knife ready. Do you want to kill him or knock him out? That's it. That's just, you want to kill him or knock him out? Like, that right there is like a...
And that's the thing.
There is no third choice. It's a...
Here's the thing. Like, if you want to kill him or knock him out, I'm not going to say you'll actually kill him if you want to kill him. I'm not saying you'll actually knock him out if you want to knock him out. But what are you doing? What are you doing?
So yeah, and I think the only things that we didn't get to in terms of these lists, I think there's a couple of things that we didn't get to, like environmental obstacles, but we've kind of made a couple examples of those. High risk, high reward. I think we've kind of already talked about that loosely, but just again, make all of this worth it. Don't ever make a sense of emergency turn out to be nothing. Like, don't make it a nothing burger, but also don't let them walk away having struggled to complete it and then they get absolutely zilch for it. Right. Don't just make it a difficult situation. You got to make them walk away with it. You got to make them worth it. Hoylepa also made a good point too about how to also like scale like the like how to take. We were talking earlier about how to learn your players and how to take them into account. Mm-hmm. So he's talking about how to know like plan what they're going to do. So if you have a mage who always uses fireball, set them up against enemies who are immune to fire. So again, those little things can enhance the situation and make it seem more engaging, more emergency-like, because the easy fix is obviously off the table. And then the last one I want to leave with, this is more of a saying, but I think it's good for both players and DMs to keep this in mind. Especially for in a sense of emergency, when you're trying to set this up, when you're trying to build it, plan for success, but prepare for failure. And that's both the player and the DM, because you want to plan for success. Everyone wants it to succeed. So that's what you want all of the focus to go into. You want to assume everyone's going to succeed. Plan for the success, but make sure you prepare if they fail. Be prepared to make sure that time counter gets ticked if they don't do it in a certain time. Make sure that those loss conditions
runs out.
Yes, those loss consequences have to be adhered to. The worst thing you can do is just find out that this was a nothing burger, because anytime you try to make the stakes higher, they're just not gonna care.
Very much so. That consistency we were talking about a while back, that really is key.
So plan for the success. Just assume it's going to succeed, but be prepared for the failure. Be prepared to, again, it's a trope about this, but you'd be surprised how many DMs are actually afraid of TPK. Like hands down, straight up afraid to TPK. They feel like, I know so many DMs who have straight up told me they literally think that they've never TPK'd before, because they're like, if I did, never again. They would never game. Like they literally fear if they TPK'd, that's the end of the gaming group.
I feel like that stems from a lot of people
Here I'm afraid.
who are afraid themselves of being a part of a TPK, right? Because imagine, like, whatever it is, whatever investment you've put in, it's like you feel like
it's a loss. It sucks.
People feel like there's no coming back from that. Number one, right? And it sucks, but it and even if there isn't any coming back from it, it's like, I don't know. I definitely think that there's value in death, right?
Oh yeah, no. There's
And
value with
so-
loss. There's value with the fear of death and the chance of death. But there's also value in understanding that death isn't always the worst consequence. It shouldn't always be the worst
And
consequence,
it's not always technically the end.
and it shouldn't always be the first go-to consequence. You know what I mean? Like we talked about this before. It's like I'm just kind of sick and tired of the whole beat it until it stops moving mentality of encounters. Where it's
Yeah.
like, I want more of an incentive to not have so much death and destruction and have more fights. Like, again, you see it in anime a lot. Fights that end in combos and then they just both go their separate ways. Or you're just beaten and bruised. Like that mentality of just like,
If you
you're
were to give it a
down.
percentage, what do you think?
Of what?
Beat it until it stopped moving versus, we'll just say, have an alternate goal.
Mm-hmm.
If you were to give it a percentage of how much should be in your games, how much of one versus the other?
I think, okay, so it depends on if you're playing more of a traditional mindset, I would say 80% kill it till it stops moving, or just beat it till it stops moving. Because that's traditional D&D. Once in a while to
Dungeon
enhance
crawl
the
type.
Yeah, add in the alternate as a spice up to dialogue, role play, and to keep the plot moving. I think a better version of D&D that is more role play focused and less just about, the combat focus, I think it should be more like a 60-40. And that's either direction. Just a 60-40, not quite 50-50, but either have your game lean more towards death is not the standard end for combat. Like most people don't die at the end of every combat. That's the standard, and death only happens on the extreme combats. Or alternatively is a lot of the times people die during combat, but there's a good portion that people just go their separate ways after throwing a couple punches, or one person realizes, hey man, I'm not going to beat you today. I'll take a knee today. You know what I mean? Like, cause again, think about real world, right? There's in history, we've flip-flopped of the concept of just take a hit and get your stuff out versus I'm going to kill you. And that's the mentality I think that you could have is I think 60-40 either direction, whether it's 60% no death or 60% death.
Now, you would say to choose one and stick with it instead of flip-flopping. Because if you flip-flop between the two, you're basically turning it into 50-50.
I meant like, if you're having like high point,
Right.
I would say like if you have a consistent setting, I would say that if you're playing standard D&D, keep it 90%, beat it till it stops moving. Mm-hmm. But if you want to add, I don't want to say more realism, but if you want to add more of a dynamic realm,
I like that.
Choose a 60-40. Either 60% of the time we just kill everything, but 40% of the time it's really enriching in one way or the other, or 60% of the time or 70% more than average people don't die from fighting. It's just people die, people punch each other and they move on. 0 hit points isn't death, it's unconsciousness, right? Change your mentality, change your mechanics on it, and your whole gameplay could be different, right? You just left for dead. Your shit gets stolen, but you wake up in the forest and you're just minus a sword now because they took your sword and they took your shield and, whatever, right? Like that imagine that gameplay where you don't die every fucking combat. You don't almost lose the entire campaign. You just lose some of your shit. And you wake up
less shit on you.
Yeah, you just get knocked out or you get kidnapped. Like there's
it's
so
like when
many
you're running around in Minecraft and you're like, I don't want to lose all my shit, so I'm gonna keep it.
Yeah,
back in my chest.
there's a lot more ways to go about that than just plain death. And I think that if I were to say what I think would be a better use is I would say anywhere. I would say put more non-death. I think it should be more non-death. I think we should get away.
What are you striving for in high point?
I think ultimately I'd like around a 70, maybe 75% non-death as standard. As in it's not expected to kill just because you're fighting. Mm-hmm. Knock out, kidnap. I want it to get to a point to where it's like if you're within like 10% of your health, maybe you just take a knee, or maybe it takes a constitution check to stay standing. So, because you see those things in movies and TV and anime where like, they're beaten, they're bloody, they take a knee, they're like, just kneel, like just surrender, right? They're just telling them, just stop, just I'm one. And then it's just the whole, no. And then they stay, they struggle. That's the constitution check. You struggle, no. And then you stand for the fight, right? Like imagine we did that, that class. Remember the anime swordsman who had that ability to re-stand up and get like a second wind? Like, that's what I imagine combat should be. There should be a point at which you've taken so much damage, it should be hard for you to stand back up. But if you want to, it should look bad. And it should just be that whole, you grunt, you wipe the blood off your lip and you go, no, I'm still here. Like, again, but you also couldn't. And it would be cool that the standard is, don't follow me. She's the sword and walks away. Like, just the dynamics. And then you could have more NPC play where if you beat an NPC and leave him to live, he's going to just try to become stronger and come after you. Like, there was the video game, the Lord of the Rings video game that did that with the orcs. Every time you beat an orc, that orc would come back stronger, and the backstory would matter.
Is that what that was? Is that a Lord of the Rings video game?
That was a Lord of the Rings video game where every time you like battled a master orc and you beat him, they would come back stronger. But it was that same. It was like,
and
but
they got names, and
yes,
then, like,
and
they
it
got
would
ranked
build
up and all this.
And it would build upon that, and that's what I'm talking about. That's what I would like to get to high point is. I would like to see about 75% of combat not result in death. And be more realistic in terms of you beat the ambush, you knock them all out, you take their gold and you run away, right? Like, why would you kill them? Because think about just all of the fucking bodies that are in D&D worlds. Who's cleaning that shit up? No one's thinking about that. You know how many forests just have random people? No one thinks about it. Come on. You know what pisses me off?
That's why I like Green Burial.
You know what pisses me off? And we're gonna end it with this just little rant. But what pisses me off is how many bodies we leave behind as adventurers. And how few bodies we ever pass. You're telling me I'm the only motherfucker on this entire continent leaving bodies everywhere I go, but everywhere I go, no one's left a body behind? But every trade route should have at least one dead body per mile based on how much combat's in D&D.
That's what your mile markers are, man. It's like, hey, there's a dead body.
I'm just saying.
Another dead body.
Anyway, guys, thank you so much. Horlepa, thank you for being in chat. If you guys were watching on YouTube, thank you guys so much for being here with us. This was a fantastic day. We went a lot longer than I expected to, but it was a fun topic. Sense of emergency, adding it, whether it's on the campaign level, an encounter level, a section of your campaign, even just in dialogue. It's a great tool to get your players invested and to really make some, to add some spice either to what's happening or just to get them to, refocus their efforts or to get a player group that isn't really working together. This is a good way to also trauma bond them together by making them focus on something. Dragon Corpse created to play. That's a cool idea. Right. But yeah, that's going to be us. So thank you guys so much. I hope you guys had a great week. I hope you guys have a good weekend. I hope you have a good weekend to look forward to. That's what I meant to say there. Nice. I hope you guys like this. If you're on YouTube, like and subscribe. Let us know in the comments what you did like and what your thoughts are on anything that we talked about today. If you guys like homebrew, join us on Monday at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time where we will be doing homebrew review. Actually, Hoylepa, who's in chat right now, we have his item coming up. We have a cursed flag, I believe it is, right?
Yes.
So yeah, we'll be interested to do that. So join us on Monday for that, and then join us next Friday, as always, where we'll do another deep dive on a different topic. But that's going to be us. It's been fantastic. Thank you guys so much. Oh, and let us know both either on YouTube or let me drop the Discord link if you guys want to join the Discord community, chat with us, submit homebrew. That's great. But please, in the comments in Discord, let us know what you think about the new camera setup. I'm really liking this. We're probably we're gonna get rid of this. We're gonna get rid of like all this bar up here. But yes, let us know what you guys. Chat's over here for me. Let us know what you guys think of chat. Let me know what you guys think of this camera view. We're trying to just make things a little bit better, and we're trying to make it easier for YouTube content in the future. So yeah, let us know what you guys think. That's gonna be all for us today. Have a great weekend, y'all. Cheers.
Deuces, my friends.